The school tried to expel my daughter. Then her genius IQ revealed the billionaire who abandoned us Part 2. 3 months had passed since that disciplinary hearing where Principal Herrera threatened to expel my 9-year-old daughter for being too smart. 3 months after Cassiel Monroe walked back into our lives, discovered he had a daughter, and began the slow work of earning her trust. 3 months of Tuesday and Thursday dinners, weekend robotics competitions, and the careful reconstruction of something that felt dangerously close to family. Our kitchen table had become the center of our small universe. Tonight, like most Tuesday evenings, Naomi worked on her latest project while Cassiel and I reviewed foundation paperwork and pretended we weren't stealing glances at each other when we thought she wasn't looking. "You're both being obvious," Naomi announced without looking up from her screen. "Your micro-expressions betray elevated dopamine levels consistent with romantic attraction." 9 years old, I muttered to Cassiel. "She's 9 years old and is diagnosing our neurochemistry." "She's not wrong, though," he replied, his hand finding mine under the table. "This has become our routine." Cassiel would arrive for homework help that had evolved into family dinners, project review sessions, and these stolen moments of connection that felt simultaneously brand new and comfortably familiar. We were rebuilding what we'd lost, but better this time, built on honesty, on presence, on the daily choice to show up. "Dad, can you review my code logic?" Naomi asked, and my heart still caught slightly every time she used that word. 3 months of consistent presence had earned Cassiel the title, though she'd informed him he remained on probation pending long-term behavioral data. As they bent over her laptop together, both sets of unusual eyes scanning the screen with identical intensity, I felt something settle in my chest. This was what healing looked like, not dramatic or cinematic, just ordinary evenings filled with homework and inside jokes and the quiet satisfaction of being together. My phone buzzed. A text from my supervisor at the diner asking if I could cover tomorrow's lunch shift. I calculated quickly. Tomorrow was Wednesday, my usual day off, which I'd planned to spend catching up on laundry and paying bills that were always slightly overdue despite my best efforts. But an extra shift meant an extra $70, and $70 was groceries for a week. "Everything okay?" Cassiel asked, noticing my expression. "Fine. Just scheduling." I didn't elaborate. We'd established boundaries about finances. He could contribute to Naomi's education, but my living expenses remained mine. It was important to maintain that independence, that proof that I wasn't with him for what he could provide materially. He studied me for a moment with that analytical gaze that saw too much. But he didn't push. That was growth too, learning when to respect boundaries instead of trying to solve every problem with resources. "Mom works too hard," Naomi observed, still typing. "Statistically, your current work-life balance is unsustainable long-term. Statistically, 9-year-olds should worry about their own homework." I finished my homework in 17 minutes. I'm working on a personal project now. "Different categories entirely." Cassiel laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "She has a point about the work-life balance, though. She can make that point when she's paying rent. What none of us knew was that while we sat in our small apartment, building our careful happiness, Gregory Monroe sat in his penthouse office reviewing quarterly reports from the Monroe Foundation. He'd largely left the foundation to Cassiel's management, considering it a useful tax structure and good public relations, but ultimately less important than the real work of Monroe Capital. This quarter's expenditures caught his attention. A single recipient had received an unusually comprehensive support package through the foundation. Full scholarship to the institute, private cognitive evaluation, supplemental tutoring, even a high-performance laptop, and specialized software. The Foundation's guidelines allowed for such comprehensive support, but Gregory's instinct for patterns, the same instinct that had built his empire, triggered alarm bells. He pulled the file from the system. Naomi Brooks, age 9, Single mother, Leighton Brooks. The approval note read simply, "Priority case, exceptional circumstances warrant full foundation support." The note was signed by Cassiel with a designation Gregory had never seen his son use before, personal attention required. Gregory stared at that phrase for a long moment. Personal attention. From his son who kept careful professional distance from foundation recipients. His son who'd built walls between his personal life and his professional obligations ever since the Singapore debacle a decade ago. He opened the detailed file. The cognitive evaluation results made him sit forward in his chair. Test scores that exceeded measurement scales. Pattern recognition abilities that bordered on prescient. Mathematical reasoning at advanced undergraduate levels. Coding capabilities that suggested intuitive understanding rather than learned skill. Gregory recognized these patterns. He'd seen them before, in his late wife, and he saw them every time he looked in the mirror at his own reflection, back when he'd been young and building his first ventures, back when people had called him brilliant instead of just rich. He flipped to the biographical section. Mother, Leighton Brooks, age 30, education, community college, business administration, completed 10 years ago. Employment history, multiple part-time positions including current work at a diner. Previous employment included tutoring at Riverside Community Center. Riverside Community Center. The name hit Gregory like cold water. That was where Cassiel had volunteered during what Gregory had always thought of as his rebellion phase, the year before he'd finally accepted his role at Monroe Capital and left for London and Singapore. The timing aligned perfectly. Gregory pulled up a photo attachment in the file, a school picture, the kind every parent buys because you're supposed to. The girl looked directly at the camera with an intensity unusual for a 9-year-old. Dark hair, serious expression, and eyes that made Gregory's coffee cup freeze halfway to his mouth. Those eyes. That particular shade that shifted between colors depending on the light. The slight difference between the left and right iris, barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it. Gregory had those eyes. His father had those eyes. Cassiel had those eyes. This child, Naomi Brooks, with the extraordinary mind, and the single mother who worked at the community center where his son had volunteered, had Monroe eyes. Gregory set down his cup with shaking hands and did the math that any competent executive could do. Naomi Brooks, born March 2016. Cassiel had left for London in late 2015. Before that, he'd been in the city, volunteering at that community center, much to Gregory's irritation at the time. His son had a child, a daughter, a 9-year-old granddaughter that he'd never mentioned, never introduced, never brought into the family where she belonged. The betrayal hit first, sharp and hot. Then came the implications, the questions about judgment, about secrets, about what else Cassiel had hidden. And underneath it all, something Gregory wouldn't acknowledge even to himself, hurt. His only son had built a family and deliberately excluded him from it. He reached for his phone, then stopped. He needed more information before confronting Cassiel. He needed to understand the full scope of what had been hidden and why. Gregory called his executive assistant. "I need a comprehensive background check on Leighton Brooks and her daughter Naomi Brooks. Everything is employment history, education records, financial information, medical records if legally accessible, social connections. I want to know everywhere they've lived, every job they've held, every interaction they've had with Monroe entities. Everything." "Timeline, sir?" "By tomorrow morning. This is priority level 1. After he hung up, Gregory sat in his office as the sun set over the city, staring at that photograph of a child who carried his genetics in her unusual eyes and his son's brilliance in her documented achievements. Somewhere out there, his granddaughter had existed for 9 years, and he'd known nothing about her. The anger built slowly, methodically, the way Gregory approached everything in business. By the time the sun had fully set, he'd made his decision. Tomorrow, when the background check was complete, he would confront Cassiel. And this time, his son would answer every question, or Gregory would take action with or without cooperation. Family wasn't a negotiation, blood carried obligations, and Naomi Brooks, whether she knew it or not, was a Monroe. That meant something, regardless of what name appeared on her birth certificate or what life her mother had chosen to build in the shadows of poverty. Gregory Monroe didn't lose assets to ignorance, and he certainly didn't to lose grandchildren to his son's misplaced sense of independence. Tomorrow, everything will change. The next morning, Gregory's assistant delivered a file thick enough to represent a hostile takeover bid. He read it while drinking his first coffee, and by page 3, his cup sat forgotten, cooling on the imported Italian marble of his desk. The report was thorough, as he'd demanded. Leighton Brooks, age 30, education, community college degree in business administration, completed 2016. Current employment, Doris Miller's Diner, evening shifts, hourly wage barely above minimum. Previous employment, multiple part-time positions including tutoring work at Riverside Community Center from 2014 to 2015. There it was, the overlap. The exact time frame when Cassiel had volunteered at that same center, when he'd come home talking about teaching kids to code, about making a difference, about things that mattered more than quarterly earnings reports. Gregory flipped to the financial section. The numbers painted a stark picture. Leighton Brooks lived paycheck to paycheck, had lived that way for a decade. No significant assets, no savings beyond a few $100s, no safety net of any kind. Medical insurance through government assistance programs. Housing in a modest apartment complex on the edge of the district where rent consumed 40% of her income. She'd raised his granddaughter in poverty. Real poverty. Not the romanticized kind that appeared in feel-good stories, but the grinding everyday kind that meant choosing between electricity and groceries, between medicine and rent, between survival and anything resembling comfort. The final section covered Naomi herself. School records showed a child who'd been flagged repeatedly as gifted but difficult. Disciplinary files thick with incident reports, most of them describing behavior that Gregory recognized immediately. She questioned authority. She pointed out errors in the curriculum. She solved problems in ways that teachers couldn't follow. She refused to show her work because her mind leaped directly to conclusions that others reached through laborious steps. She was Elena, his late wife, reborn in a grandchild he'd never known existed. Elena, who'd struggled in every educational system she'd encountered until she'd finally found her way to advanced mathematics and theoretical physics in graduate school. Elena, who'd spent her youth feeling broken because the world had no framework for minds like hers. Gregory reached the final page and found the detail that confirmed everything. Medical records, obtained through a careful interpretation of privacy laws, showed Naomi's birth certificate. Father, not listed, but the genetic markers were clear in the photograph, in the documented cognitive architecture that matched both Cassiel and Elena, in the timeline that aligned perfectly with his son's presence in the city 9 months before this child's birth. Gregory picked up his office phone and dialed his son's direct line. It rang 4 times before Cassiel answered, his voice carrying the slight distraction of someone pulled from focused work. Father, is something wrong? Come to my office, now. Cancel whatever you're doing. A pause. I have a foundation strategy meeting in 20 minutes. Cancel it. This isn't a request, Cassiel. It's a summons. And before you consider refusing, know that I've already discovered what you've been hiding. The only question now is whether you come here voluntarily or whether I take more aggressive action to get the answers I deserve. Another pause, longer this time. When Cassiel spoke again, his voice had changed, gone flat and careful. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Gregory hung up without responding and returned to staring at the photograph of his granddaughter. Naomi Brooks, age 9, brilliant and poor, and hidden away like a secret shame, his son's daughter, his own genetic legacy living in circumstances that no Monroe should ever experience. Whatever Cassiel's reasons for this deception, they would be insufficient. Blood demanded acknowledgement, family requires honesty, and Gregory Monroe did not tolerate being excluded from decisions about his own lineage. The confrontation that was about to occur would reshape everything. Gregory could feel it the way he'd felt market shifts before they became obvious to others, the way he'd sensed opportunities that built his empire. This moment, this meeting, would divide his life into before and after. He just didn't yet know whether the after would be better or worse than the carefully controlled present he'd constructed. But he would have his granddaughter acknowledged. He would have his family complete. Everything else was negotiable. Cassiel stood in the elevator ascending to his father's office, his hands clenched at his sides, his mind racing through scenarios and responses. His father knew about Naomi. The question wasn't whether to confirm it, the question was how to control the damage that Gregory Monroe's knowledge would inevitably cause. He'd known this moment would come eventually, had dreaded it since the day he'd walked into Principal Herrera's office and seen those familiar eyes staring back at him from his daughter's face. Had delayed it by keeping his personal life separate from Monroe Capital, by maintaining the careful walls between the foundation he controlled and the corporation his father ruled. But Gregory Monroe didn't accept walls, didn't respect boundaries when he decided something required his attention, and apparently his quarterly review of foundation expenditures had triggered exactly the investigation Cassiel had hoped to avoid. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor. His father's assistant looked up from her desk with an expression that confirmed Cassiel's worst suspicions. She knew something significant was happening. That meant his father had involved her in whatever research he'd conducted, which meant the information was comprehensive and damaging. "He's waiting for you," she said quietly, "and Cassiel, good luck." That was almost worse than the summons itself. His father's staff didn't offer luck unless they thought you'd need it. Cassiel straightened his shoulders, checked that his phone was on silent, and opened the door to his father's office. Gregory stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, hands clasped behind his back in the pose he adopted when preparing for difficult negotiations. On his desk, clearly positioned for maximum impact, sat a file folder thick with pages and a photograph paper-clipped to the front. Naomi's school picture. His daughter, staring seriously at the camera with those eyes that marked her as unmistakably Monroe, displayed on his father's desk like evidence in a trial. "Close the door," Gregory said without turning around. Cassiel obeyed, then stood in the center of the office, refusing to sit without invitation, maintaining what little control he could in a situation where his father held all the advantages. "I'm going to ask you one question," Gregory said, finally turning to face him. "And you're going to answer it honestly, because we both know I already have the truth. I just want to hear you say it." Cassiel met his father's gaze directly, saw the anger there but also something else, something that looked almost like pain. "What's the question?" "Is Naomi Brooks my granddaughter?" No point in evasion, no benefit to delay. "Yes." "How long have you known?" 3 months. I discovered her existence the same day you're looking at it in that file, when Dr. Taylor's evaluation came across my desk as director of the foundation. That stopped Gregory cold. Whatever he'd expected, it wasn't that. "You didn't know this before 3 months ago?" "I didn't know at all. Leighton tried to reach me when she found out she was pregnant. She sent a letter to Monroe Capital, addressed to me personally, telling me about the baby. I never received it. That's impossible. All your correspondence was forwarded during your time in London and Singapore. Not all of it. Not the correspondence your staff deemed inappropriate or distracting. Not the messages from people who didn't meet whatever criteria had been established for protecting Monroe interests." Cassiel watched his father's face as understanding dawned. "You're saying my security protocols blocked communication from this woman?" I'm saying your system, designed to insulate me from anything that might interfere with my focus on Monroe Capital business, intercepted a letter from the mother of my child. A letter that would have changed everything if I'd received it. By the time I came back from Singapore, Leighton had moved, changed her contact information, built a life that didn't include me because she believed I'd chosen not to respond. Gregory moved to his desk, sank into his chair with the heaviness of someone absorbing a blow. And when did you discover this 3 months ago? Why not tell me then? Because I was earning their trust. Because my daughter needed to decide if she wanted a father before I complicated her life with a grandfather she'd never met. Because Leighton spent 9 years raising Naomi alone, in poverty, without support of any kind, and she deserved to control who entered her daughter's life and on what terms. She's Monroe, Gregory said, his voice rising slightly. She has rights, inheritance, protection, access to resources that could transform her entire future. You kept that from her for 3 months? I kept you from her for 3 months. There's a difference. Naomi received everything she needed through the foundation, scholarship, evaluation, equipment, tutoring. What I didn't provide was access to a grandfather who would try to manage and control her the way you've tried to manage and control everything else in your orbit. That's not fair. It's completely fair. Cassiel leaned forward, hands on his father's desk. Do you know what was in Naomi's school file when I found her? Pages of disciplinary reports. Incident after incident of teachers who feared her intelligence, administrators who wanted to expel a 9-year-old for being too smart, systems that treated her brilliance like a behavioral problem. She's everything Mom was, everything Mom could have been if she'd had proper support. And she was being punished for it. Something shifted in Gregory's expression at the mention of his late wife. Elena struggled the same way, exactly the same way. Naomi questions everything, sees patterns others miss, solves problems through intuition rather than procedure. And instead of recognizing that as exceptional, her school threatened to expel her. They called her disruptive, defiant, a threat to their learning environment. A threat. A 9-year-old child with a genius-level intellect was considered threatening because she made adults uncomfortable. And her mother, this Leighton Brooks who kept my granddaughter from her family for 9 years, kept her from nothing, Cassiel said sharply. Leighton worked 3 jobs while pregnant, gave birth alone because I wasn't there to answer her calls or read her letters. She raised an extraordinary child while facing poverty that you can't even imagine from this office. She attended every school event, fought every battle with administrators who didn't understand Naomi, created stability despite having no resources beyond her own determination. What she did in 9 years with almost nothing is more impressive than anything either of us has built with every advantage. Gregory absorbed this, his face unreadable. I want to meet her, my granddaughter. I have a right. You have no rights, Cassiel interrupted. No automatic claims, no presumed access. You want to meet Naomi? You'll do it on Leighton's terms, following Leighton's rules, accepting Leighton's boundaries. Because that woman raised Monroe without Monroe resources, and she doesn't owe this family anything, not gratitude, not access, not accommodation of your ego or your sense of entitlement to your genetic legacy. She's my granddaughter. Gregory's voice carried an edge now, the tone that preceded ultimatums. That's not negotiable. Her safety is not negotiable. Her well-being is not negotiable. Whether you get to meet her at all, that is negotiable, and it's entirely dependent on whether you can respect boundaries instead of steamrolling over them with lawyers and money and Monroe influence. They stared at each other across the desk, father and son, both stubborn, both Monroe, both unwilling to concede, but for very different reasons. What do you want from me? Gregory asked finally. Humility, patience, respect for Leighton's authority as Naomi's mother, and an understanding that if you push too hard, if you try to force access or throw legal weight around, you'll lose me permanently. The foundation is mine. Mom made sure of that in her will. Monroe Capital is yours, but if you go after Leighton or Naomi with aggression instead of respect, I'll cut every connection between us and never look back. That's not a threat, it's a promise. Gregory nodded slowly, calculating. I want to meet her. This week. under whatever terms her mother sets, with whatever restrictions she requires. I'll be respectful, patient and appropriate, but I will meet my granddaughter, Cassiel, one way or another. I'll talk to Leighton. I'll explain the situation. If she agrees, we'll arrange something. If not, you'll wait until she's ready. And if I decided to pursue legal recognition, paternity tests to establish biological connection, requests for visitation rights through family court, formal acknowledgement of lineage. The threat hung in the air between them, corporate negotiation tactics applied to family relationships in the way Gregory Monroe approached everything. Cassiel felt ice settle in his chest. Then you'll prove that everything I've believed about you is true, that you value control over connection, power over relationship, winning over actual family. And yes, you might get court-ordered access to Naomi eventually. But you'll destroy any possibility of genuine relationship with her in the process. She's 9 years old and brilliant enough to understand exactly what you'll have done. She'll comply with court orders while despising the grandfather who forced his way into her life. You think I want that? I think you've spent 70 years getting what you want through force when negotiation proved inconvenient. I'm asking you, as your son, to try a different approach. Just this once, let someone else control the process. Trust that I'll advocate for your access while protecting Leighton's boundaries. Give me 48 hours to discuss this with them and find a solution that works for everyone. Gregory looked at the photograph on his desk, at the granddaughter he'd discovered and already felt possessive about, despite never having met her. 48 hours. Then I take action whether you facilitate or not. That's my final offer. I'll call you tomorrow, Cassiel said, then left before his father could add more conditions or threats. In the elevator descending from the executive floor, Cassiel pulled out his phone and texted Leighton with hands that shook slightly. "Can you meet me tonight? After Naomi's asleep. We need to talk." Her response came within seconds. "That sounds ominous. Should I worry?" He stared at his phone, trying to find words that were honest but not alarming. Finally, he settled on the truth. My father knows about Naomi, and he wants to meet her. The 3 dots indicating she was typing, appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, come over at 9. We'll figure this out. But as Cassiel sat in his car in the parking garage, he wondered if there was any way to figure this out that didn't end with someone getting hurt. His father was many things: brilliant, driven, accomplished but gentle, and had never made the list. And Leighton had spent 9 years building walls to protect herself and Naomi from exactly this kind of intrusion. He'd promised to be her partner, her equal, her support. Now he had to prove it by standing between her and the full weight of his father's determination to claim a granddaughter he'd just discovered existed. The careful peace they'd built, the slow reconstruction of trust, the fragile hope that second chances could work, all of it was about to face its first real test. And Cassiel had no idea if their foundations were strong enough to survive the storm that was Gregory Monroe deciding he wanted something. I knew something was wrong the moment Cassiel walked through my door at 9 o'clock. He carried tension in his shoulders like physical weight, and his eyes that usually softened when he looked at me were dark with worry. "Naomi's asleep?" he asked, glancing toward her room, out cold. She had a robotics club until 6, then finished a coding project. She crashed around 8:30. I guided him to the couch, noting how his hands clenched and unclenched. "Tell me what happened." He told me everything. His father's discovery, the confrontation, the 48-hour deadline, the thinly veiled threat of legal action. I listened without interrupting, feeling old walls rising brick by brick around my heart. "So let me understand this correctly," I said when he finished. "Your father, who didn't know Naomi existed until yesterday, is now demanding access to her within 2 days, or he'll start throwing legal weight around. That's the summary, yes. And you think I should just invite him over for dinner? Let him waltz into our lives because he's Gregory Monroe, and Gregory Monroe gets what he wants?" "No." Cassiel grabbed my hands, holding firm when I tried to pull away. I think we should set up a meeting on your terms with your rules in a way that protects Naomi first, but Leighton, he's going to meet her eventually. The question is whether we control how that happens or whether he forces the situation. I stood, needing distance, needing to move. This is exactly what I was afraid of, that the money and power would eventually steamroll over everything we've built. We've had 3 months of normal, 3 months where Naomi got to have a dad without the Monroe Circus. And now that's ending. It doesn't have to end. We just need to manage his introduction carefully. Manage him? I spun around. Cassiel, this is my daughter, our daughter. She's not a business problem to be managed. She's a 9-year-old child who's finally feeling secure, finally has routines and stability. And you want me to introduce chaos in the form of a grandfather who thinks legal threats are appropriate negotiation tactics? He's scared and he's hurt. His only son has a child he never knew about. He's processing that badly, but the emotion underneath is real. I don't care about his emotions. The words came out harsh, but I meant them. I care about Naomi's well-being. I care about protecting her from people who see her as a possession rather than a person. And everything you've told me suggests your father is firmly in the possession category. Give him a chance to prove otherwise. Why should I? I crossed my arms, hating how defensive I sounded, but unable to stop. What has Gregory Monroe ever done to earn access to my daughter? He facilitated your disappearance from my life. His assistant intercepted my letter. His system created this entire situation. Now he wants to make amends, fix it, control the narrative? You're right, about all of it. He doesn't deserve access based on past behavior. But Leighton, he's still Naomi's grandfather, and she's going to have questions about that side of her family eventually. So we'll handle it eventually, when she's older, when she's prepared, when my father's lawyers have already established visitation rights through family court. Cassiel's voice sharpened with frustration. Because that's what he'll do if we refuse him. He'll file for grandparents' rights, claim you're alienating him from his granddaughter, turn this into a legal battle that will drag through courts for months. Is that what you want Naomi to experience? Lawyers, depositions, custody evaluations, her life examined by strangers? The threat landed like a punch, because he was right. Gregory Monroe had resources to wage legal warfare that would dwarf anything I could afford. Even with Cassiel's support, fighting his father in court would be brutal, expensive, and traumatic for everyone involved. So what you're really saying is that I don't have a choice. Gregory Monroe gets what he wants because he's powerful enough to force the issue. I'm saying we have choices about how this happens. We can be proactive and protective, or we can be defensive and let courts decide. Neither is perfect, but one gives us control. I sank onto the couch, exhausted suddenly. This was supposed to be the stable part, the after-the-struggle phase. We'd done the hard work of rebuilding trust. Cassiel had proven himself consistently for 3 months. Naomi was thriving. And now this, a new battle, a new threat, a new powerful man demanding accommodation. What do you think I should do? I asked finally. Cassiel sat beside me, careful not to touch until I leaned into him slightly, giving permission. His arm came around my shoulders, and I let myself take comfort even as my mind raced through terrible scenarios. I think you should agree to one meeting. Here, in your apartment, with strict ground rules. I'll be here the whole time. Naomi doesn't have to call him Grandpa or commit to any ongoing relationship. It's just an introduction, supervised and controlled. He paused. And if he violates your rules or makes you uncomfortable, he doesn't get a second meeting. We'll deal with legal threats if they come together. You'd stand with me against your father, without hesitation. You and Naomi come first. Always. I wanted to believe him. Part of me did believe him. 3 months of consistent presence had earned significant trust, but another part, the part that had survived abandonment and single parenthood, whispered warnings about powerful men and their promises. Of course. He pulled me closer, pressing a kiss to my temple. Whatever you decide, I support you completely. We sat in silence for long minutes, both processing what this meant. The careful bubble we'd built, where it was just us learning each other again, building something real, was about to be invaded by Gregory Monroe's overwhelming presence. "Tell me something," I said eventually. "You've been managing your father's interference your whole life. How do you do it? How do you keep him from taking over everything?" Cassiel considered this. Boundaries. Clear, firm, consistently enforced boundaries. He pushes, I push back. He threatens, I call his bluff. He tries to control me, I remind him that I'm an adult with my own life. He smiled ruefully. "It's exhausting. And it only works because the foundation is legally mine. Mom made sure of that. If I worked for Monroe Capital, I'd have no leverage. So basically you win by having resources he can't access and being willing to walk away completely if necessary. Essentially, yes, I don't have those advantages. I have an overdrawn bank account and a daughter who needs stability. If your father decides to flex his power, I can't just walk away from the battlefield. But you have me. My resources, my legal team, my willingness to burn every Monroe bridge if protecting you requires it. You're not alone this time, Leighton. You're not the 20-year-old facing impossible odds with no support. You have a partner now." I looked up at him, studying his face for any hint of doubt or reservation. I found only steady determination and something deeper, the kind of commitment that shows up in actions rather than words. "Okay. One meeting. Here. Saturday afternoon, 2 hours maximum. You're present the entire time. And the moment he steps out of line, he leaves and doesn't come back until we decide otherwise. Those are my terms, I'll tell him. And Cassiel?" I grabbed his hand. "If he hurts her, if he makes Naomi feel less than or wrong, or like she needs to change to be acceptable, I will burn down his entire world. Monroe money or not." The next morning, I sat Naomi down for breakfast and explained the situation as simply as I could. Her face went through a series of expressions I'd learned to read over 9 years: surprise, calculation, concern, and finally that analytical calm that meant she was processing complex variables. "So Dad's father knows I exist and he wants to meet me," she summarized. "And you're uncomfortable with this because he's powerful and has historically made poor decisions regarding emotional relationships." "That's remarkably accurate, yes. And you're worried he'll try to control or change me, or that he'll hurt my feelings, or that he'll create instability in our currently functional family unit. Also accurate." She took a bite of cereal, chewing thoughtfully. "What does Dad think I should do?" "He thinks you should meet Gregory once, in a controlled environment, to gather data about his character and intentions. Then we can make informed decisions about future interactions." "That's logical." She set down her spoon with precision. "I want to meet him. I'd expected this, but it still stung slightly." "You do?" "Mom, I'm a scientist. I gather data before forming conclusions. Right now, all I know about my paternal grandfather is second-hand information, most of it negative. But correlation doesn't equal causation. Just because he's made mistakes doesn't mean he'll make those same mistakes with me. I need primary source material. He might hurt your feelings, baby. He might say things that are critical or try to change who you are. Then I'll have important information about his character and can adjust my expectations accordingly." She looked at me with those 2 old eyes. "Besides, I'm curious. Does he have my programming abilities? Is he as analytically minded as Dad and me? Does he also see patterns everywhere?" "Those are good questions. So I should meet him to get answers. It's simple, really. Nothing about this situation felt simple, but I understood her logic. Naomi approached life like a research project, gather evidence, test hypotheses, draw conclusions based on data rather than emotion. It was how her mind worked, and trying to protect her from information would only frustrate her. "Okay, but we have rules. He comes here, to our space. He stays for 2 hours maximum. Dad will be here the whole time. And if you feel uncomfortable at any point, you can go to your room and the meeting ends. No questions asked. Acceptable terms." She resumed eating. "When is this meeting?" "Saturday afternoon, 2 o'clock. That gives me 3 days to prepare questions and research his business history." "Good timeline." I watched my 9-year-old daughter pull out her tablet and begin creating what looked like a spreadsheet titled Gregory Monroe Assessment Protocol, and I wondered, not for the first time, how I'd ended up raising someone who treated family meetings like scientific experiments. But maybe that was exactly the approach we needed. Emotions made everything messy. The data was clean, objective, measurable. If Naomi could assess Gregory Monroe the way she'd assess a coding problem, maybe she'd protect herself better than I ever could. Saturday arrived with unseasonable warmth and cloudless blue skies, the kind of perfect weather that felt like cosmic mockery of my internal turbulence. I'd cleaned the apartment twice, more from nervous energy than actual need. Naomi had dressed herself in what she called her professional casual outfit, dark pants and a button-up shirt that made her look simultaneously adorable and unnervingly adult. Cassiel arrived at 1:30, earlier than planned, bringing beverages from my favorite shop and a tension in his jaw that betrayed his own anxiety. He'll be exactly on time, he warned. Punctuality is one of his few consistent virtues. At 1:58, my doorbell rang. Cassiel and I exchanged a look, here we go, and he moved to open the door while I positioned myself next to Naomi on the couch, a physical barrier between my daughter and whatever was coming. Gregory Monroe stepped into my small apartment and immediately made it feel smaller. He was tall like Cassiel, but broader, with silver hair and those same unusual eyes that now looked at my daughter with an intensity that made my protective instincts flare. He wore a suit, despite Cassiel explicitly telling him to dress casually. The suit probably cost more than my monthly rent. Everything about him radiated power, control, wealth, all the things that had intimidated me at 20 and still triggered my defenses at 30. "Ms. Brooks," he said, his voice deep and measured, "thank you for agreeing to this meeting. Mr. Monroe, these are my rules, 2 hours. You address Naomi respectfully, and if anyone feels uncomfortable, the meeting ends immediately. Understood?" His gaze moved to Naomi, and something shifted in his expression, something almost vulnerable. "Hello, Naomi. Hello, Gregory." She'd chosen not to call him grandfather, a deliberate choice she'd explained to me. "Titles are earned, not automatic. Please, sit." I gestured to the chair across from us, the only seating that maintained physical distance. What happened next was perhaps the most awkward hour of my life. Gregory tried. I'll give him that. But every attempt at connection felt calculated. Every question sounded like a job interview, and his obvious discomfort in our modest space created tension thick enough to taste. "So Naomi," he began, "Cassiel tells me you're exceptionally intelligent. That's what the cognitive evaluation indicated, yes. What are your interests, besides computers?" "Primarily computers. Also mathematics, pattern recognition, music theory, and systematic analysis of inefficient systems." Gregory nodded, like she'd confirmed something. "You get that from Monroe genetics. We're all problem solvers. Actually, intelligence is approximately 50 to 80% heritable, but environmental factors play a significant role. Mom's contribution to my development is statistically equivalent to genetic factors." I watched Gregory process being corrected by a 9-year-old. Of course, I simply meant that certain aptitudes run in families. They do. But aptitude without proper nurturing is just potential. Mom turned my potential into capability through consistent educational support, despite limited resources. Gregory's gaze flickered to me, something unreadable in his expression. "Your mother has clearly done an excellent job raising you." "She has. She worked 3 jobs while I was young, attended all my school events, advocated for me when teachers didn't understand how my mind works, and created a stable home environment despite financial constraints. Her achievement is statistically remarkable." I wanted to hug my daughter and also remind her that she didn't need to defend me. but watching her calmly list my efforts to a man who could have made them all unnecessary with a single check felt like vindication I didn't know I needed. "I apologize," Gregory said, and for the first time he sounded genuine rather than performative. "I'm handling this badly. I prepared for a meeting, not a conversation." "Yes. Your body language and speech patterns suggest high stress and unfamiliarity with unstructured social interactions involving children." Cassiel coughed to cover a laugh. I bit my lip to keep from smiling. Gregory actually smiled slightly. "You're very direct. Indirect communication is inefficient and often leads to misunderstandings. I prefer clarity." "So do I, actually." He leaned forward slightly. "Then let me be clear. I didn't know you existed until 3 days ago. I'm still processing that information. I'm angry at circumstances that kept us apart, but I'm not angry at you or your mother. I want to know you if you're willing to let me try. But I understand I have no automatic right to your time or affection." It was perhaps the most honest thing Gregory Monroe had said since arriving. Naomi tilted her head, analyzing him with those sharp eyes. "Why do you want to know me? Be specific." "Because you're my granddaughter. That's genetic coincidence, not motivation. Why do you specifically want to know me?" Gregory was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried weight I hadn't expected. "Because my wife, your grandmother, was like you. Brilliant mind, different way of thinking, struggled in systems that didn't understand her. She died before I fully appreciated how special she was. You remind me of her, and that's both painful and precious." Naomi absorbed Gregory's answer with the careful consideration she applied to complex problems. The apartment fell silent, except for the distant sounds of the city filtering through our windows, traffic, voices, the ordinary noise of life continuing while our small family negotiated its expansion. "That's honest," Naomi said finally. "Emotionally complicated, potentially problematic if you project your wife onto me, but honest. I'll try not to project. You're your own person." "Yes, I am." She glanced at me, some silent communication passing between us, then back to Gregory. "You can have a probationary relationship with me, subject to performance review." Dad had the same arrangement initially. He passed probation after approximately 3 months of consistent appropriate behavior. I nearly choked. My daughter had just put a billionaire on probation like he was a junior employee. Gregory, to his credit, took it seriously. "What are the terms of probation?" "Consistent presence, respect for Mom's rules, no attempts to change me or buy my affection, honesty over performance, and most importantly, you don't get to override Mom's decisions. She has final authority, even if I think my decisions are better. Especially then. Mom has 9 years of data about what I need. You have 3 days. Her judgment supersedes yours until you prove otherwise." Gregory looked at me then, really looked, and I saw him calculating something. Finally he nodded. "Those are fair terms. I accept probation." "Good." Naomi stood. "I'm going to work on my project now. You can visit again next Saturday if you follow the rules this week. Dad will update you on compliance metrics." She walked to her room, leaving the 3 adults staring after her. "She's terrifying," Gregory said after a moment. "She's amazing," I corrected. "Both can be true." He stood, and I noticed his hands were shaking slightly, the first crack in his controlled facade. "Cassiel, may I speak with you and Ms. Brooks privately for a moment?" "Anything you need to say can be said with both of us present," Cassiel replied, moving to stand beside me, a physical representation of allegiance that wasn't lost on his father. "Very well." Gregory straightened, and I saw him choosing words carefully. "Miss Brooks, I owe you an apology. Multiple apologies, actually. My assistant's interference in your attempts to contact Cassiel was inexcusable. I created a system that prioritized corporate interests over human connections, and you paid the price. We both did. But Naomi paid the biggest price. She spent 9 years without a father because your system deemed me unworthy of response." "Yes." He didn't flinch from the accusation. "I can't undo that." but I can do better going forward. If you'll allow it, that depends entirely on whether you can follow a 9-year-old's rules without your ego getting in the way. A slight smile touched his mouth. My ego has survived worse blows than probation from my granddaughter. I'll adapt. After he left, Casil and I stood in my small apartment, both processing what had just happened. That went better than expected, he said finally. He'll fail. Within 2 weeks he'll try to override one of my decisions or throw money at a problem, and Naomi will extend his probation. Probably. Casil pulled me close. But he'll also keep trying. That's his one consistent trait. He doesn't quit. Neither do I. And if it comes to a battle between his stubbornness and mine, I've got 9 years of practice protecting her. He's got 3 days of good intentions. Casil kissed my forehead. I know who I'm betting on. Later that night, after Casil had gone home and Naomi was supposedly asleep, she appeared in my doorway. Mom? Yeah, baby? Gregory's not as scary as I expected. He's just confused. And sad underneath the business exterior. You got all that from an hour conversation? People reveal more through what they don't say than what they do. He didn't mention money once, didn't try to impress me with his success, just wanted to understand me. She paused. I think he might actually try to earn probation. We'll see, I said, not ready to trust yet. Mom, she said again, thank you for letting me decide about meeting him. Most parents would have just said no. You're smart enough to make good choices. I trust you. I know. That's why I trust you back. After she returned to bed, I sat in the dark living room thinking about second chances and whether people like Gregory Monroe were capable of real change, or if power always corrupted genuine connection. I guessed I'd find out over the next few weeks. But whatever happened, I'd protect Naomi first, billionaire grandfather or not. Nobody got to hurt my daughter on my watch. Not even family. The week following Gregory's first meeting established patterns that would define everything that came after. He called Casil daily for what he termed compliance updates, which really meant asking what he could do to pass Naomi's probation. Casil, playing mediator between his father and us, looked increasingly exhausted by Wednesday. He wants to send her a laptop, Casil told me over lunch at the diner during my break. Top of the line, custom configuration for programming. She already has a laptop, one you helped me choose specifically for her needs. That's what I told him. He suggested an upgrade. Absolutely not. First rule, no buying affection. He's already failing. I explained that. He's adjusting his approach. Casil rubbed his temples. This would be easier if he understood that presence is worth more than presence. Most rich people don't understand that distinction. Present company excluded? I smiled despite my irritation. You're on permanent probation too. Don't get cocky. Later that evening, after my shift ended and I'd picked up Naomi from her coding club, we found an envelope at our apartment door. Inside was a handwritten letter, Gregory's surprisingly neat script on expensive stationery. The letter read, Dear Naomi, I've been thinking about our conversation regarding inefficient systems. You mentioned that your school's dismissal procedure creates unnecessary hallway congestion. I took the liberty of reviewing similar problems in corporate environments. I'm attaching separately, as I learned from your father, that unsolicited gifts violate probation terms, a case study about traffic flow optimization in high-density environments. You might find the mathematical models interesting, regardless of their source. I'm learning that respect for boundaries requires conscious effort after decades of having none. Thank you for your patience with my learning curve. Respectfully, Gregory. The case study, delivered through Casil the next day after I'd approved it, was exactly the kind of complex problem Naomi loved. She spent hours analyzing the models, occasionally muttering about variables and probability matrices. Gregory's smart, she announced at dinner. Not as smart as Dad or me, but smart. And he listens. One case study doesn't mean he's changed. No, but it means he's trying to speak my language instead of making me speak his. That's statistically significant behavioral modification. I was learning that my daughter's standards for relationship success were both higher and more practical than mine. She didn't need grand gestures or emotional declarations. She needed evidence of consistent effort and respect for her autonomy. Gregory, apparently, was learning the same lesson. If you've ever had to protect your child from powerful people who thought money meant automatic access, comment boundaries matter right now. Hit that like button if you believe that titles like Grandpa should be earned through consistent behavior, not claimed through genetics or wealth. This story is about what happens when a billionaire discovers he has to follow a 9-year-old's rules to earn his place in her life, and it gets more intense from here. Gregory Monroe is about to face tests that his boardroom experience never prepared him for, and the question isn't whether he'll fail, it's whether he'll learn from those failures. Subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories if you want to see whether real change is possible when someone's willing to humble themselves enough to earn what they can't buy. We're building a community of people who understand that family isn't about blood or money, it's about showing up consistently even when it's uncomfortable. Share this video with anyone who's ever had to set boundaries with family members who thought power trumped respect. These stories matter because they show that protecting your child isn't about being difficult, it's about being wise. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is make someone prove they deserve access to your child's heart. The next chapters are going to test everyone: Gregory, Cassiel, Leighton, and even Naomi herself, because growing a family is messier and harder than any of them expected. But it's also more valuable than any fortune Gregory Monroe ever built. Comment below, would you put a billionaire on probation? What rules would you set? And have you ever had to protect your family from people who thought their status meant they didn't need to respect your boundaries? We're past 2,500 subscribers because of viewers like you who engage, share, and believe these stories need to be told. Let's keep growing this community. Like, comment, subscribe, and share. Every single interaction helps us reach more people who need to hear that second chances exist, but they have to be earned. Now let's get back to the story, because Gregory Monroe's probation is about to face its first major test, and what happens next will determine whether this family can survive the collision between old money and new boundaries. 2 weeks into Gregory's probation, something shifted. He'd completed 4 volunteer shifts at Riverside Community Center, the same place where Cassiel and I had met a decade ago. The director there, a woman named Maria, who'd seen countless volunteers come and go, reported that Gregory Monroe was different from what she'd expected. He actually listens, Maria told Cassiel during one of their regular check-ins. Most wealthy people who volunteer want credit and photo opportunities. Your father shows up, does the work, and leaves. No fanfare, no demands for recognition. Whatever's happening in his personal life, it's changing him. Cassiel relayed this to me during one of our Tuesday evening dinners. We'd fallen into a comfortable routine. He'd arrive around 6, help Naomi with whatever project consumed her attention, then stay for dinner and conversation after she went to bed. These evenings had become the foundation of our rebuilt relationship, ordinary moments that proved more valuable than any grand gesture. My father volunteering without publicity is significant, Cassiel said, helping me wash dishes while Naomi worked in her room. He's built his entire public image around strategic philanthropy, doing work that benefits no one except the recipients. That's new behavior. One good deed doesn't erase decades of prioritizing image over impact. No, but it suggests capacity for growth, which is all we can ask for. I handed him a plate to dry, our hands brushing in a way that still sent small electric shocks through my system even after 3 months. Your father called me yesterday. Did he tell you? Cassiel paused mid-wipe. He called you directly, not through me. He wanted permission to attend Naomi's robotics competition next Saturday. Said he understood if I said no, but he hoped I'd consider it. I set down the dish I'd been washing. He was respectful, almost humble. It was unsettling. What did you tell him? That I'd discuss it with Naomi and let him know. He thanked me and hung up. No pressure, no manipulation, just a straightforward request. That's progress, Cassiel said carefully. Real progress. The next morning, I presented Gregory's request to Naomi over breakfast. She considered it with her usual analytical approach, probably running calculations I couldn't follow about probability and risk assessment. "Robotics competitions are public events," she said finally. "He doesn't technically need permission to attend, but the fact that he asked demonstrates respect for boundaries. That's positive behavioral data." "So you're okay with him being there?" "I'm okay with him attending as an observer. He doesn't get to sit with us or interact with my team. If he can handle those restrictions, he can come." I relayed this to Gregory through Cassiel, half expecting him to push back against the limitations. Instead, he accepted them immediately and thanked me for considering his request. Saturday arrived with the organized chaos of youth robotics competitions, dozens of teams, anxious parents, malfunctioning equipment, and the peculiar energy of controlled competition. Naomi's team was third in the queue, giving us time to settle into our usual spot in the bleachers. Gregory arrived exactly when he said he would, dressed casually in jeans and a simple shirt, carrying no briefcase or phone that might signal he was conducting business rather than attending a family event. He spotted us immediately, but didn't approach, instead taking a seat 3 rows behind us where he could observe without intruding. The self-restraint was remarkable. I'd expected him to push boundaries, to try leveraging his presence into more access than we'd granted. Instead, he sat quietly, watching Naomi's team compete with the focused attention of someone genuinely interested rather than someone performing interest for an audience. When Naomi's team won their match, Gregory didn't rush down to congratulate her. He waited until we'd finished celebrating, until the immediate excitement had passed, and only then did he approach, directing his comment to me first. "Ms. Brooks, thank you for allowing me to attend. Naomi's team showed impressive strategy. You can tell her yourself," I said, gesturing to my daughter. He turned to Naomi with careful respect. "Your robot's turning mechanism was elegant, minimal movement, maximum efficiency. Well designed. Thank you. We optimized for speed over power and calculated that most opponents would prioritize force." She studied him briefly. "You understood the strategy. That's more than most observers notice. I recognize good engineering when I see it. May I ask what programming language you used?" They fell into technical conversation that I could follow but couldn't meaningfully contribute to. Cassiel stood beside me, watching his father interact with his daughter, and I saw something complicated cross his face, satisfaction mixed with old hurt, hope tempered by years of disappointment. "He's trying," Cassiel said quietly. "He is," I agreed. "The question is whether trying is enough." After the competition, Gregory asked if he could take us all to lunch. I saw Naomi about to analyze the request, so I interjected with our established protocol. "We have our regular Saturday lunch plans, but you can join us if you'd like. We're going to the diner on Morrison Street. Nothing fancy." "I'd like that very much." The diner was our place, the restaurant where I worked evening shifts, where the staff knew us and Naomi could order her usual without needing to explain her preferences. Taking Gregory there was deliberate. He'd be in our world, adapting to our standards rather than us performing in his. He handled it better than I expected. Didn't comment on the worn booths or basic menu, didn't try to order anything complicated or demand modifications. He asked Naomi about her upcoming projects, listened to her detailed explanations without interrupting, and when she mentioned needing specific equipment for a new coding project, he didn't immediately offer to buy it. That restraint, that resistance to solving problems with money, was perhaps the most impressive thing he'd done since entering our lives. It meant he was actually listening to the rules we'd established, actually learning from his mistakes. After lunch, as we prepared to leave, Gregory addressed me directly. "Ms. Brooks, I'd like to continue attending Naomi's events if that's acceptable. I understand I'm on probation, and that access is earned, not automatic. But I hope my behavior today demonstrates that I can respect boundaries while still being present." "It did," I admitted. "You can attend future events with the same restrictions, observer status, no interference with Naomi's activities. No presumption of increased access. I understand. Thank you. After he left, Naomi pulled out her tablet and made notes in whatever system she'd created for tracking Gregory's probation status. He's improving. Compliance rate is approximately 70%, up from 40% 2 weeks ago. Trajectory suggests he may pass probation within 2 months if current behavioral trends continue. You're actually calculating his probation success rate. How else would I objectively assess his progress? She looked up at me with those 2 serious eyes. Mom, I think he actually wants to be my grandfather. Not just claim me as family, but actually build a relationship. That's statistically unusual for wealthy people approaching unexpected family connections. What makes you think that? He asked me about my projects, not my grades. He noticed engineering details, not just outcomes. He respected your rules, even when it clearly frustrated him. Those behaviors indicate genuine interest in me as a person, rather than as a concept. She paused. And he looked sad when he thought no one was watching, like he knows he's missed an important time and understands he can't buy it back. My daughter, the relationship scientist, was teaching me lessons about grace and second chances that I'd spent years resisting. Maybe Gregory Monroe was capable of change. Maybe powerful people could learn humility when motivated by something that mattered more than power. Maybe second chances weren't signs of weakness, but evidence of wisdom. 3 weeks into Gregory's probation, right when everyone thought we'd established stable patterns, everything nearly fell apart over a phone call I received during my Thursday morning shift at the diner. Ms. Brooks? This is Jennifer from the district office. I'm calling about a concern regarding Naomi. My stomach dropped instantly. Calls from school administrators never brought good news. What kind of concern? There's been media interest in your daughter. A reporter contacted us asking about the relationship between Naomi Brooks and Gregory Monroe. We haven't confirmed anything, but I wanted to make you aware before this becomes a larger issue. I thanked her and immediately called Cassiel. He answered on the first ring, his voice tight with something that sounded like controlled fury. You've heard, he said. It wasn't a question. The school just called. How did reporters find out? My father gave an interview to a business magazine about the Foundation's expanded educational initiatives. He mentioned discovering that exceptional children often go unrecognized in standard systems, and he used Naomi as an example without using her name, but he provided enough identifying details that anyone with minimal research skills could connect the dots. I felt my vision narrow, that familiar sensation of rage mixed with helplessness that came from watching powerful people make decisions that affected my daughter without consulting me. Where are you? I asked, my voice deadly calm. At the Foundation. But Leighton, I'm handling this. No, you're not handling this. I am. Give me your father's office address. That's not a good idea right now. I don't care if it's a good idea. Gregory Monroe just violated the one rule that mattered most. He put Naomi in the public eye without permission. So you can either give me his address, or I can find it myself and make an even bigger scene. Cassiel gave me the address. 20 minutes later, I walked into Monroe Capital's executive offices wearing my diner uniform and carrying 9 years of protective fury. Gregory's assistant tried to stop me, but I moved past her with the determination of a mother whose child had been threatened. I opened his office door without knocking. Gregory stood at his window, phone pressed to his ear, but he turned when I entered and immediately ended his call. Miss Brooks, you mentioned my daughter to reporters. I didn't use her name. I was careful to protect her identity while discussing the Foundation's mission. You provided enough information that journalists are now calling her school, asking questions about her relationship to you. You turned my 9-year-old daughter into a story, a data point in your public relations campaign. That wasn't my intention. The reporter asked about what inspired the Foundation's expansion, and I answered honestly. I thought I was being respectful by not using identifying information. You thought wrong. I moved closer to his desk, watching him register the full force of my anger. Do you have any idea what you've done? Naomi goes to school on Monday, and every kid there will know she's connected to Monroe money. She'll become a target for kids who want access to wealth, a curiosity for teachers who'll treat her differently, a spectacle instead of just a student. I can call the school, explain the situation, and ask them to manage inquiries appropriately. You will do nothing. You've done enough. You're suspended from all contact with Naomi until I decide otherwise. No visits, no calls, no letters. You're off probation entirely because you failed the most basic test of respect. Gregory's face paled. Miss Brooks, please. I made a mistake, but banning all contact is disproportionate to the error. Is it? You had one job. Respect our boundaries. Don't expose Naomi publicly. Don't treat her like a Monroe asset. Don't make decisions about her life without consulting me. You failed at all three in a single interview. I understand you're angry, but Naomi deserves to make this decision herself. She's the one who set the probation terms. She should be the one who determines consequences. He was right, and I hated that he was right. Naomi had established herself as the authority on Gregory's access to her life. Taking that authority away now would undermine everything I'd taught her about autonomy and boundaries. Fine, I'll discuss this with Naomi, but until she makes a decision, you stay away from both of us. And Mr. Monroe, if you ever put my daughter at risk again, billionaire or not, grandfather or not, I will make it my life's mission to ensure you never see her again. Courts, lawyers, legal battles, I don't care what it costs. You will not treat her like a public relations opportunity. I left before he could respond, before my anger could transform into something messier and more complicated. In the elevator descending from the executive floor, my hands shook with adrenaline and fear. Fear that I'd overreacted, fear that I hadn't reacted strongly enough, fear that no amount of boundaries could protect Naomi from the reality of being connected to Monroe wealth and power. That evening, I sat Naomi down and explained what had happened. She listened without interrupting, her expression shifting through calculations I couldn't follow. So Gregory violated probation terms by discussing me publicly, even though he didn't use my name directly, she summarized. Yes, and now reporters know I am connected to the Monroe family, which means my school environment will change on Monday. Probably yes. She nodded slowly, processing. What do you think I should do? I think you should decide what consequences Gregory faces for violating your trust. This is your probation system, baby. You set the terms, you enforce the consequences. Naomi pulled out her tablet and reviewed whatever documentation she'd created about Gregory's probationary period. After several minutes of silent analysis, she looked up at me with a decision made. He's demoted. Back to the beginning of probation with restricted access. 1 supervised visit per week instead of 2. No attendance at my school events until he demonstrates better judgment. And mandatory completion of 10 volunteer hours per week at the community center to prove he understands the impact of publicity on regular people's lives. That's very specific. Consequences should be specific and measurable. Otherwise, how do you assess whether someone's actually changed? She set down her tablet. But Mom, I want to tell him these consequences myself. He violated rules I established, so I should be the one who enforces the penalty. Are you sure? Yes. Can we call him now? 10 minutes later, we had Gregory on speakerphone. Cassiel had arrived just as we were dialing, positioning himself beside me in a show of united parental front that I appreciated more than I could articulate. Before Gregory could speak, Naomi cut him off with a voice colder than I'd ever heard from her. You violated probation terms. Specifically, Rule 3, no public exposure without explicit consent. You discussed me with reporters, and now my school knows about Monroe family connections. You put my privacy at risk because managing public perception felt more important than respecting boundaries. Naomi, I can explain the context. I don't want context. I want to know if you understand why what you did was wrong. Silence on the line. Then Gregory's voice, careful and strained. I thought I was protecting you by not using your name. I see now that protection and respect are different things. I should have asked permission before discussing anything related to you publicly, even in general terms. I failed to consider how information spreads and how connections get made. I prioritized the Foundation's message over your safety. That was wrong. Acceptable acknowledgement of error. Naomi consulted her tablet. Here are your consequences. You're demoted to the beginning of probation with modified terms. 1 supervised visit per week instead of 2. No attendance at my school events for 1 month. 10 volunteer hours per week at the community center, up from 2. And you write a statement to the magazine clarifying that the Foundation serves many children and that singling out any individual case violates privacy principles you should have protected. Do you accept these consequences? Another pause. I accept them. And Naomi, I'm sorry, truly sorry, not just for the violation but for making you feel unsafe. That was never my intention, but intentions don't erase impact. No, they don't. She paused, and I saw something flicker across her face, calculation mixed with something softer. Gregory, I'm disappointed in you. I was starting to think you understood that I'm a person, not a story. This makes me question that assessment. You should question it. I clearly still have lessons to learn about separating my instinct to manage narratives from my responsibility to protect the people I care about. I hope you'll give me the opportunity to demonstrate that I can learn from this failure. That's what the modified probation is for. Demonstrate better judgment, and we'll reassess in 1 month. Continue making mistakes that prioritize your interests over mine, and probation extends indefinitely. After we ended the call, Naomi sat quietly for a moment before speaking. I thought he was doing better. I thought he understood. He was doing better, I said gently. And then he made a mistake. That's how growth works, baby. It's not a straight line from bad behavior to good. It's messy and inconsistent, and sometimes people backslide even when they're trying hard. So should I give up on him? That's your decision. But consider this. Your dad made mistakes too when he first came back into our lives. He had to learn how to respect boundaries, how to ask instead of assume. He's been worth the patience we invested in his growth. The question is whether Gregory deserves the same patience. Naomi absorbed this, her brilliant mind working through equations of risk and reward, trust and self-protection. 1 month, she decided. He gets 1 month to prove he can do better. If he fails again, I'm done trying. That's fair, Cassiel said, speaking for the first time since the call ended. And Naomi, I'm proud of how you handled that. You were firm without being cruel, clear without being dismissive. Those are difficult skills even for adults. I learned from watching Mom, she replied simply. Later, after Naomi went to bed, Cassiel and I sat together processing the day's chaos. My father is going to fail her again, he said quietly. Not because he wants to, but because 70 years of operating one way doesn't change in a few months. He'll make more mistakes. Probably, I agreed. The question is whether the mistakes get smaller or bigger, whether he learns or just apologizes and repeats. And if the mistakes get bigger, if he can't change enough to be safe for her, then we protect her from him. Even if it hurts, even if it's complicated, we protect her first. Cassiel nodded, pulling me close. I chose you and Naomi over him once already when I confronted him in his office. I'll make that choice again every time if necessary. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, I said. For Naomi's sake. She deserves a grandfather who's actually worthy of the title. She deserves everything, Cassiel murmured. And we're going to make sure she gets it, one boundary at a time. Comment privacy matters right now. If you believe that protecting your child's identity is more important than someone's good intentions. Hit that like button if you've ever had to enforce consequences with a family member who violated your trust. What just happened is exactly why boundaries aren't optional, they're essential. Gregory Monroe thought he was helping by promoting the Foundation's mission. He thought avoiding Naomi's name meant he was protecting her. But intentions don't erase impact, and powerful people need to learn that their decisions have consequences for the vulnerable people in their orbit. Naomi did something remarkable. She enforced accountability while still leaving the door open for redemption. That's wisdom that most adults never develop. She didn't cut Gregory off completely, but she made clear that trust, once broken, has to be rebuilt from scratch with stricter supervision. Subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories if you want to see whether Gregory can actually learn from this failure, or whether this is the beginning of him proving that billionaires can't really change. The next chapters will test whether someone can transform their instincts after 70 years of operating with power and privilege. Share this video with anyone who's ever had to protect their child's privacy from well-meaning family members who didn't understand boundaries. These stories matter because they normalize standing firm even when people accuse you of overreacting. Protecting your child isn't overreacting, it's parenting. Let me ask you, have you ever had to enforce consequences with someone you wanted to trust? Someone who kept saying the right things, but whose actions told a different story? Drop your experiences in the comments, because this community is built on sharing real struggles and real solutions. We're growing because viewers like you understand that these stories aren't just entertainment. They're templates for handling difficult family dynamics with grace and firmness. Every like, every comment, every share helps us reach more people who need permission to set boundaries without guilt. And here's what's coming. Gregory has 1 month to prove he can change his behavior patterns. 1 month to show that making mistakes doesn't define you, but learning from them does. 1 month to earn back the trust he lost through a single interview that prioritized publicity over protection. But while Gregory works on his redemption, something else is building between Leighton and Cassiel. 3 months of rebuilt trust, consistent presence, and watching each other parent. Their daughter, together, has created a foundation strong enough to support something more. And in the next chapters, you'll see what happens when second-chance love moves from careful reconstruction to committed future. Comment below, would you give Gregory Monroe another chance after this violation? What would he have to do to earn back your trust? And if you were Naomi, how would you balance wanting a grandfather with protecting yourself from being hurt again? Keep engaging, keep sharing, keep believing that change is possible when someone cares enough to do the hard work. Like, comment, subscribe, and let's get back to the story. 4 weeks after the interview incident, Gregory Monroe had completed every requirement of his modified probation, and then some. He'd logged 48 volunteer hours at the community center, more than the required 40. He'd written and published a clarification statement that emphasized privacy principles over foundation publicity. He'd attended 0 school events, respecting the boundary Naomi had established. And he'd shown up for his 1 weekly supervised visit with a humility that transformed awkward meetings into actual conversations. But the real change, the one that convinced me Gregory might actually be capable of growth, happened during his 4th week of modified probation. Maria from the community center called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I thought you should know what your daughter's grandfather did yesterday. I braced myself for bad news. What happened? He asked if he could start a business skills program for teenagers. Not through Monroe Foundation funding, just him personally teaching kids about financial literacy, business planning, practical skills. He said he'd been working with one teenager who wanted to start a small business but had no framework for understanding profit and loss. Gregory spent 3 hours helping this kid build a business plan, and when the kid mentioned needing startup capital, Gregory didn't write a check. He helped the kid create a crowdfunding strategy and identify micro-loan programs. He didn't just give money. He did the harder thing. He taught skills. The kid learned more in those 3 hours than any check could have provided. Your grandfather, he's different than he was a month ago. Something broke through. That evening, Gregory arrived for his weekly supervised visit carrying no gifts, no case studies, no materials beyond himself and his attention. Naomi greeted him at the door with her standard assessment protocol, but this time Gregory didn't wait for her questions. "I need to tell you something before we start," he said, addressing all three of us. "I've been reflecting on the interview incident, on why I made that choice, and I realized something uncomfortable about myself. I spent 70 years measuring success by visibility. If people didn't know about my achievements, they didn't count. That's why I mentioned you to the reporter, Naomi. Not to exploit you, but because I've been conditioned to believe that impact requires publicity." He paused, choosing words carefully. "Working at the community center taught me something I should have learned decades ago. The most important work happens when nobody's watching. The teenager I helped yesterday will probably never know my full name, and will never tell anyone that Gregory Monroe taught him business fundamentals. And that's exactly how it should be. The impact is in his success, not in my recognition for helping him achieve it." Naomi studied him with those analytical eyes. That's significant insight. Most people never recognize their own patterns of behavior, let alone articulate how those patterns harm others. I'm 70 years old. It shouldn't have taken me this long to understand basic human decency, but your probation system forced me to examine my motivations in ways I'd avoided my entire life. So thank you for that, even though it was uncomfortable. "Discomfort is often necessary for growth," Naomi replied. "Dad experienced similar discomfort when he first entered my life. He had to unlearn patterns of assumptions and relearn how to ask instead of presume. You're following a similar trajectory, just condensed because I have data from Dad's probation to inform my expectations for yours." Gregory smiled slightly. "So I benefit from your previous experience with reforming Monroe men? Essentially, yes, though your specific challenges are different. Dad struggled with presence and consistency. You struggle with control and visibility. Different deficits require different remediation strategies." They fell into conversation about Naomi's current project, some algorithm for analyzing musical patterns across cultures. Gregory asked thoughtful questions, admitted when he didn't understand concepts, and never once tried to redirect the conversation toward his own expertise or experiences. Afterward, when Cassiel walked his father out, Gregory asked to speak with me privately for a moment. We stood in my apartment hallway, this billionaire and this diner waitress, navigating the complex territory of a family being built through choice rather than default. "I owe you a specific apology," Gregory said, "not just for the interview, but for my initial reaction when I discovered Naomi existed. I was angry at Cassiel for keeping secrets, angry at you for raising her without Monroe resources, angry at circumstances rather than accepting responsibility for creating the system that separated my son from your letter 10 years ago. That anger was misdirected and unfair. I appreciate that acknowledgement. More than that, I need to thank you. You raised an extraordinary child in circumstances that would have defeated most people. You created stability despite poverty, nurtured brilliance despite lacking resources, and protected her from systems that wanted to break her. What you accomplished in 9 years with almost nothing is more impressive than any empire I've built with every advantage. I should have said that the first day I met you." The words hit harder than I expected. Gregory Monroe, who built his identity on achievement and success, was acknowledging that my survival might be more impressive than his fortune. "I did what any mother would do," I said, uncomfortable with the praise. "No. Most mothers don't face what you faced and still produce a child who's not just intelligent but also kind, not just capable but also grounded. Naomi has a moral center that many children raised with every advantage lack. That's your doing, not genetics or luck. That's you choosing her well-being over everything else every single day for 9 years." I felt tears threatening and pushed them back. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm trying to learn from my mistakes instead of just apologizing for them. One mistake was assuming that Monroe resources and Monroe genetics were the important factors in Naomi's life. The truth is you, your consistency, your sacrifices, your love, Those are what made her who she is. I can offer opportunities now, but you built the foundation that makes her capable of seizing those opportunities. I should honor that, instead of minimizing it. After he left, I found Cassiel and Naomi waiting in the living room, both clearly having overheard at least part of the conversation. "He's passing probation, isn't he?" I asked Naomi. She consulted her tablet with its detailed tracking systems. Current probability of successful completion, 87%. If he maintains current behavioral patterns for 2 more weeks, he'll be promoted from probation to standard grandfather status. How do you feel about that? Cautiously optimistic. He's demonstrated capacity for insight and behavior modification. The interview incident was a significant failure, but his response to consequences has been exemplary. I'm prepared to trust him with increased access. That night, after Naomi went to bed, Cassiel and I stood on my small balcony, looking at the city lights. "My father is changing," he said quietly. Actually changing, not just performing change, because Naomi demanded it. Because she gave him specific metrics and consequences and refused to accept anything less than genuine effort. She got that from you, that refusal to accept performance over substance. You've been demanding authenticity from me since day one, refusing to be impressed by resources or position, insisting I prove myself through action. I leaned into him, feeling his warmth against the cool evening air. You did prove yourself. You keep proving yourself every Tuesday and Thursday, every weekend, every ordinary moment where you choose us over convenience. "I want to keep choosing you," he said, turning me to face him. "Not just for Tuesday and Thursday, not just for weekend visits. I want you here, in my space, full-time, you and Naomi. I want to wake up with you every morning, not just the mornings after I've stayed late. I want our life together to be the default, not the exception." "Cassiel, we talked about this. I need to maintain some independence, some proof that I'm choosing you for the right reasons. You've proven that every day for 3 months. Every time you refuse financial help beyond Naomi's education, every time you insist on paying your own rent despite being exhausted from work, every time you set boundaries around what I can and can't contribute, you prove you're not with me for resources. The only person who still doubts your motivations is you." He was right. I was holding on to independence like armor, afraid that depending on him would somehow diminish me or recreate the vulnerability of being 20 and abandoned. "What are you asking for exactly? Move in with me, you and Naomi, not because you need to, but because building a life together makes more sense than splitting that life across 2 addresses. We're already a family. We're just maintaining separate households for reasons that don't serve anyone anymore." I thought about my small apartment, about 9 years of memories and survival, and making do with less. Thought about the freedom of having my own space versus the exhaustion of maintaining that space while building a relationship. Thought about what Naomi might gain from seeing what healthy partnership looked like on a daily basis, rather than in scheduled visits. "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Take all the time you need. But Leighton, I'm not going anywhere. Whether you move in tomorrow or 6 months from now or never, I'll still be here, still choosing you, still building this family with you. The address is just logistics." After he left, I sat in my small apartment, thinking about change and trust, about whether holding on to independence had become its own form of prison rather than protection. Maybe it was time to believe that second chances could last. Maybe it was time to trust that Cassiel's consistent presence over 3 months was more meaningful than his absence 10 years ago. Maybe it was time to stop protecting myself from potential hurt and start building toward actual happiness. 6 weeks after Gregory's interview incident, the Monroe Foundation hosted its annual gala. Cassiel had asked if Naomi and I would attend, explaining that his father planned to announce the expanded educational access initiative publicly and wanted a family present. The request came with no pressure, just an invitation that I could accept or decline based on our comfort level. Naomi surprised me by wanting to attend. Grandpa Gregory earned a promotion from probation last week. This event is significant for him. I should be there to demonstrate support for positive behavioral change. So I found myself in a borrowed dress, standing in a ballroom full of wealthy donors while my daughter networked with foundation board members like she attended galas every weekend. Cassiel stayed close, his hand on my lower back, anchoring me in an environment where I felt perpetually out of place. Gregory spotted us the moment we arrived. He moved through the crowd with the ease of someone accustomed to these events, but when he reached us, his entire demeanor softened. "You came, all of you. You invited us," Naomi replied, "and you've successfully completed probationary requirements. This felt like appropriate recognition of your achievement. Thank you. That means more than you know." He looked at me. "Miss Brooks, I'm grateful you allowed this. I know social events aren't comfortable for you. I'm here for Naomi. She wanted to support you. Then I'm doubly grateful." He glanced at Cassiel. "Your mother would have loved meeting her granddaughter. They're remarkably similar. They would have understood each other instantly." Cassiel agreed. The evening proceeded with typical gala rhythm: cocktails, dinner, speeches. When Gregory finally took the stage, the room quieted with the attention of powerful people. But instead of the polished performance I'd expected, he started with vulnerability that made several board members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Most of you know me as Gregory Monroe, founder of Monroe Capital, builder of business empires. Tonight, I need to introduce you to someone else, a man who failed his wife when she needed understanding, who built systems prioritizing control over connection, and who nearly lost the chance to know his granddaughter because he couldn't recognize that some things matter more than management. I felt Cassiel tense beside me. This wasn't the speech his father had reviewed with us 3 days ago. This was something more honest, more raw. My wife Elena established this foundation because she understood that brilliance without opportunity is imprisonment. She spent years feeling broken because the world had no space for minds that worked differently. She died before I fully appreciated how many barriers she'd overcome. His voice wavered slightly. 3 months ago, I discovered I had a granddaughter. She's everything Elena was: brilliant, different, misunderstood by systems that fear what they can't categorize. And she was being raised by a remarkable woman who understood what I never grasped: that exceptional minds need protection, not management. He found us in the crowd, his gaze settling on Naomi. "My granddaughter taught me that titles are earned through consistent behavior, not claimed through genetics. That respect requires humility, not authority. That family is built through daily choices to show up, not through blood or wealth or assumptions of automatic access." She put me on probation like a junior employee, and it was the most valuable professional development I've received in 50 years. Quiet laughter rippled through the audience, but Gregory's expression remained serious. "So tonight, yes, we're announcing expansion of the Foundation's educational access programs. Yes, we're committing substantial resources to identifying and supporting exceptional minds that traditional systems miss. But more importantly, I'm acknowledging that none of this vision is mine. It belongs to Elena, who saw clearly despite a world that tried to blur her vision. It belongs to Ms. Leighton Brooks, who raised an extraordinary child while facing barriers that should never exist. It belongs to every parent fighting daily battles for children who think differently." He paused, consulting notes he'd clearly prepared without sharing with us. "I'm also announcing a structural change. Effective immediately, the Foundation's board will include representatives from community organizations, parents of exceptional children, and students themselves. We've spent too long having wealthy people make decisions about what other people need. It's time to center the voices we're supposedly serving." The applause built slowly as people processed the radical nature of what he'd just proposed. Foundation boards didn't share power with the populations they served. That wasn't how institutional philanthropy worked. But apparently, that was how it would work now. After the speech, Gregory returned to our table, looking simultaneously relieved and exhausted. Naomi studied him with her analytical gaze. That was 87% more honest than I expected. Well executed. Is that good? It exceeds my minimum threshold for authentic communication by a significant margin. She paused, then added deliberately, Well done, Grandpa. The title landed like a gift. Gregory's eyes filled with tears he didn't bother hiding. I haven't earned that yet. You're at 92% probability of maintaining appropriate behavior patterns. I'm comfortable upgrading your designation from probationary status to permanent grandfather classification. She tilted her head. Though you should know that permanent doesn't mean unchangeable. Continued poor decisions would result in demotion. Understood. I'll maintain appropriate standards. Later, during dancing, Cassiel pulled me onto the floor despite my protests about not knowing proper steps for formal events. Neither do I really, he admitted. But we'll figure it out together. As we moved through approximations of a waltz, he pulled me closer, his voice dropping to something private despite the crowd around us. I've been thinking about what my father said in his speech, about showing up daily, about family built through choices. I want to make a choice with you, publicly, officially. I want to marry you, Leighton, not next year or when circumstances align perfectly. Soon. I want to stand in front of everyone who matters and promise forever to the woman who taught me what love actually requires. My breath caught. Cassiel, we haven't even lived together yet, so let's fix that too. Move in with me now, tonight, this week. Bring Naomi. Bring whatever matters from your apartment. And let's stop maintaining this artificial separation. We're already a family. Let's act like it. Before I could respond, Naomi appeared beside us with the timing of someone who'd been monitoring our conversation. If you're proposing, Dad, you should know Mom's answer is statistically likely to be yes, based on her physiological indicators, elevated heart rate, dilated pupils, and that specific smile she uses when she's happy, but trying not to show it too obviously. You're monitoring my vital signs? I asked, laughing despite myself. I'm observant. There's a difference. She looked between us. Also, I've already researched Dad's house. It has significantly better natural light for my projects, the neighborhood school has an advanced STEM program, and the square footage would eliminate current spatial constraints. From a purely practical standpoint, cohabitation makes sense. Cassiel grinned at his daughter. So you approve? I approve of the relationship trajectory, yes. You've both demonstrated commitment through consistent behavior. Formalizing that commitment through marriage and cohabitation is the logical next step. He turned back to me, his expression shifting from amused to serious. Leighton Brooks, I've loved you for 10 years, terribly and imperfectly at first, but learning to love you better every day. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that second chances can become forever? Around us, the gala continued, music playing, people dancing, conversations flowing. But our small family unit existed in its own universe. Yes, I said simply. Because you've shown me that love is a verb, not just a feeling. Because you choose us every day. Because you've earned trust through consistency, not just promises. Yes. He kissed me then, soft and deep and full of promise, while Naomi made a satisfied sound beside us. Optimal outcome, she pronounced. Now we can formalize family structure and reduce unnecessary ambiguity about our relationship configuration. Later that night, after we'd returned home and Naomi had gone to bed, Cassiel and I stood in my small apartment that would soon no longer be home. When do you want to move? He asked. This weekend. Before I overthink it and find reasons to delay. This weekend, he agreed, pulling me close. And the wedding? Small. Just family and close friends. Nothing like tonight's event. Perfect. Because the only people who matter are already in this room or asleep down the hall. 2 days later, Gregory helped us move. He showed up in jeans and a work shirt, no entourage, no movers, just him and his willingness to carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs. Watching a 70-year-old billionaire haul my second-hand furniture, while Naomi directed traffic with her tablet and clipboard, was surreal enough to make me laugh. "What's funny?" Gregory asked, slightly winded from the stairs. "This. All of this. 3 months ago, I didn't know you existed. Now you're helping me move in with your son, while our daughter manages logistics like a tiny general. Strange how quickly life can change when people choose to change with it." He set down a box labeled kitchen. "Ms. Brooks, may I say something?" "You can call me Leighton. I think we're past formalities." "Leighton, then." He straightened, choosing words carefully. "I'm grateful you gave me the chance to prove I could be better. Most people wouldn't have. Most people would have shut the door after the interview incident and never looked back. Your willingness to allow growth despite mistakes is why Naomi is who she is, and it's why this family works." "Naomi set the terms. I just enforced them. You taught her how to set terms, how to demand respect while still leaving room for people to earn it. That's wisdom most adults never develop." He paused. "I know I can't undo the past, can't give you back the 9 years you struggled alone. But I can commit to being present for every year going forward, not as someone trying to buy his way into your good graces, but as someone who understands that family is built through showing up, day after ordinary day. That's all any of us can do, show up and try to be better than we were yesterday." By evening, my apartment was empty, my belongings integrated into Cassiel's house that was now our house. Naomi had claimed the room with the best natural light, and was already setting up her equipment with the precision of someone executing a predetermined plan. Later, after she'd gone to bed, Cassiel and I stood in our bedroom, both processing how quickly everything had transformed. "Scared?" he asked. Terrified, but less scared of this than I was of staying stuck in old patterns of self-protection. He pulled me close. "We're going to make mistakes. I'll forget to communicate something important. You'll assume I'm trying to control things when I'm just trying to help. We'll argue about parenting decisions and finances and whose turn it is to do dishes. That's the most unromantic thing you've ever said. But it's true. Marriage isn't the happy ending where everything becomes easy. It's choosing each other through the messy middle parts where nothing is easy. I want you to know that I'm choosing you for all of it, not just the good parts. I'm choosing you too. For all of it. For the first time in 10 years, I'm choosing to believe that someone will stay. We held each other in the quiet of our shared space, both understanding that this was just the beginning. Beginning of living together, beginning of marriage planning, beginning of navigating family life with Gregory as an active grandfather rather than a distant threat. It wouldn't be perfect. Gregory would make mistakes, we'd all make mistakes. Family would be complicated and messy and require constant work. But it would be real, built on foundations of earned trust and daily choices to keep choosing each other. In her room, Naomi made final notes in her family tracking system. Under relationship status, she updated, Mom and Dad engaged, cohabitation initiated, family structure optimized. Under Gregory's entry, grandfather status confirmed, probation successfully completed, permanent family member classification achieved. Then in the smaller text below, today was a good day. I have a family now, a real one, not perfect but real. And that matters more than any variable I could calculate. My brilliant daughter, who approached everything like a research project, had figured out what took me 30 years to learn, that love isn't about finding perfect people, it's about choosing imperfect people and building something real together through consistent effort. We were a family now, built not through blood or money or default assumptions, but through daily choices to show up for each other, to enforce boundaries while leaving room for growth, to demand authenticity while offering grace for mistakes. And that was worth more than all the Monroe billions combined. If you made it this far, you've witnessed something rare, a story about powerful people actually changing, about families being built through choice rather than obligation, about second chances that are earned through consistent action instead of granted through guilt or pressure. Comment, family. I sound right now if you believe that titles like dad, grandpa, or husband are privileges we prove we deserve through daily behavior. Hit that like button if this story reminded you that real transformation is possible when people care enough to do uncomfortable work on themselves. This is what Mr. Steele Rich Stories is about, showing that change is hard, messy, inconsistent, but absolutely possible when someone finds motivation stronger than their old patterns. Gregory Monroe spent 70 years operating one way, building an empire through control and management. It took a 9-year-old putting him on probation to force him to examine whether power and love require different approaches. Subscribe if you want more stories showing that accountability and grace aren't opposites, they're partners. That you can demand better behavior while still leaving room for people to grow into that better version of themselves. That protecting your children doesn't mean shutting everyone out. It means setting clear boundaries and enforcing consequences when those boundaries are violated. Share this video with anyone who's navigating complex family dynamics, anyone who's trying to figure out how to give second chances without being naive, anyone who needs permission to demand respect while still being generous with opportunities for growth. Let me ask you, what's harder? Refusing to give someone a second chance, or giving that chance while maintaining boundaries firm enough to protect yourself if they fail again? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this community is built on real conversations about real struggles. We've grown past 2,500 subscribers because you keep engaging, sharing, and believing these stories matter. Everything tells the algorithm to show this to more people. Every comment creates community. Every share reaches someone who needs to hear that their boundaries are valid, their standards are reasonable, and their caution is wisdom, not weakness. And here's what else this story showed. Leighton spent 9 years protecting herself from depending on anyone, convinced that independence was survival. It took Cassiel 3 months of consistent presence to prove that partnership doesn't diminish strength, it multiplies it. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't standing alone, it's letting someone stand with you. In the comments, tell me, what would your probation terms be if you were Naomi? What rules would you set for someone trying to earn their place in your family? And have you ever had to decide whether someone's efforts to change were genuine or just performance? This is the end of part 2, but it's not the end of the Monroe family story. Part 3 will test whether the foundations they built are strong enough to survive when outside forces target Naomi, when Gregory's business enemies see vulnerability in his newly acknowledged granddaughter, when Leighton and Cassiel have to navigate wedding planning while protecting their daughter from threats they never anticipated. But that's a story for another day. For now, this chapter closes with a family that's real, imperfect, and committed to choosing each other through whatever comes next. That's not a fairy tale ending, it's something better, a realistic beginning with people who understand that love is a verb requiring daily action. Thank you for reading. Thank you for engaging. Thank you for being part of this community that believes change is possible, that second chances can work, and that family is something you build through choice and effort, not something you inherit through genetics or buy with money. Like this video. Comment your thoughts. Subscribe for part 3. Share with someone who needs this message, and remember, the most valuable inheritance isn't wealth, it's the example of becoming better people for the ones we love. Until next time, keep choosing the people who choose you back. Keep setting boundaries that protect what matters. Keep believing that transformation is possible when someone cares enough to do the work. This has been Mr. Steele Rich Stories, where every story matters and every ending is really just a beginning.